Hey, this is Bill Rice with Kaleido. We're a lead generation agency. Today, I want to talk a little bit about how to use sales scripts. One of the common misconceptions, of course, with sales scripts is that it's kind of a rote memorization and then it becomes a crutch. And I want to talk about sort of how we build these scripts and the approach that we use. And the analogy that I always go with when we're talking about how to use a script is to think more like a movie or TV actor or actress, right? They get a script, something that's pretty formal, probably, maybe something like this, that's got everything sort of written out word for word. They go through that process of that script, they read it word for word, they start to sort of revise it, make it their own, use some of their own sort of voice and tonality, maybe some of the language that's more familiar or easier for them to use, or maybe more aligns with the role that they're playing at any given time. So that's how we want to talk about writing scripts and actually using those scripts is in the context of that sort of analogy or that sort of framework of taking something, maybe being very specific and detailed about it, making sure that it works, and then ultimately turning it into something you kind of internalize and own. In order to do that, sort of the first thing that I think often gets mistaken about scripts and even just sort of the sales process in general is we don't begin with the buying process. So, the customer ultimately, when we're building out our script or we're even using that script, we need to first and foremost think, what does the customer absolutely need to be certain of in order to buy? So we want to think about that buying process. And in order to get to that purchase, what is that customer? What's the journey that customer? I know that's kind of overused terminology, but what does that customer need to understand? What is the path to that understanding? So the bottom line here is that we often forget, in most cases, we're not actually selling a product. We're actually selling certainty. The certainty that that product or service that you want them to buy will, without a shadow of a doubt, actually deliver the client's desired outcome. That's the whole game. We're selling certainty. We're not selling a product or service. All right, so in order to accomplish that buying level of certainty, or getting them to the level of certainty in order for them to actually purchase what you're selling, we generally need to accomplish two things. The first, and again, both of these things are things that either often get out of order or we just sort of forget about this first step. But the first step is we need to lay out a logical, defensible argument, not only for the performance of the product, but also the consistency of that performance, right? So we need to start here, because oftentimes when we get engaged, a lot of times we work in the mortgage lending industry, so I'm going to use an analogy from that. When someone engages with us, a customer goes on there, they put in their information into a web form, or maybe they even call us. They're looking for a very logical outcome, right? They just want a rate quote in a lot of cases. They want a sense of what do you have to offer me? So we have to start with that logical plan, right? We're going to have to first start with them, say, hey, logically, in order for me to kind of deliver this product to you, this mortgage to you, there's a few things that I need to know above and beyond what you gave me on the form. Need to know your situation. Are you refinancing? Are you purchasing? Again, start with a very logical process instead of jumping into sales mode and getting emotional and excited and hyped up and trying to use that energy to move them forward. And instead, start with a very matter-of-fact, logical approach. What are you here to do? What are you hoping to achieve? Yeah, I understand you want a rate quote, but let's get some of those pieces of information that I need in order to give you that accurate rate quote. So again, start with the logical, and then as you're going through there, because you're being logical and you're going through a very methodical process, that actually starts to build that certainty that, oh, they're not just going to throw a rate in front of me. They're actually going to take me through a process. They're going to listen to me. I feel like this is a professional. I feel like this person is actually going to get me a mortgage and work through the process of getting me the very best rate for my situation. So that logical approach starts building that level and sense of certainty that you can deliver that product and service and you can deliver the outcome they want, which is the lowest rate. So we're going to start logical. And then as we start to build that logical framework and we can see that the customer is starting to trust and feel that certainty, feel that credibility towards us, that's when we're going to start to leverage the emotional, right? We're going to get them excited about the process that we're going through, the results that we're coming up with, maybe the initial rate quote that we're giving them. Once we start to deliver on what that person is looking for, what that outcome is, and giving them that level of certainty, you're going to hear their voice, their tone change. You're going to hear them starting to get excited, and we're going to get excited with them, and we're going to push that excitement to the sale. Right? So that second part is we're going to get them into that. We know that people buy with emotion, right? But we're going to get excited and we're going to get emotional as we build on that logical argument when they start to turn, right? So those two important objectives lead me to why the sales script and using a sales script is essential, right? Because there's really two ways to do those two things, right? We got a logical argument we got to lay out, and then as that logical argument turns to certainty with the client, they're going to get emotional and they're going to get excited, and we want to get excited with them. But it's really hard to kind of do that process if we haven't laid it out in advance. We haven't thought through what that ideal sales conversation would be like and begin to outline it. So when I'm outlining the sales script that I'm going to use, knowing that I need a framework, there's really kind of two approaches that I'll do, and you saw one of them. So one approach is to kind of have a formal sales script, something that I'm going to build. Maybe I'm going to write word for word, and then I'm going to use, normally I do this when it's a product or a service that I'm selling over and over again, and I want to formalize it, and I want to be able to scale that script. So I want to be able to roll it out to more salespeople, or want to replicate that sales process very specifically because I know that it works for multiple salespeople. Or I'm a sales director and a team lead, and I want my whole team using the same script. So that's a more formal process. I'm going to talk about that in a second. The other thing is more sort of a personal on the fly sort of script. So every time I go into a sales conversation, I have a script, even if it's just a note card. These are actually 3 different scripts, and there's some interesting pieces to these particular scripts. So whenever I'm going into a sales process or a conversation, I will quickly scribble down, even if I'm going into the call, within 24 hours, or maybe I just got a lead in, I'm getting ready to engage that lead very quickly. I'll make sure that if I don't already have a prepared script, that I'm taking a look at that lead and I'm going to write out a quick note card. And you can see all of my scripts really have 3 pieces to them. And so when we get into this script, when we talk about the kind of on the fly script, I'm going to sort of break down how I do that. So let's go first with the formal script. So how do I go about building the formal script so that it gets used properly and can be used properly? Well, first and foremost, I listen to a ton of sales calls, right? So if I'm a sales team leader, sales director, I'm a consultant going into a client, we're going to figure out, okay, I'm going to write a sales script for this particular product. So I want to hear as many sales calls as I can for the way that they're doing it today, because there's going to be good and bad in there. There's going to be a lot of good, right? So instead of me just sort of anticipating what might work, I want to use some data-driven evidence in order to build that script. So I'm going to listen. I'm going to take lots of notes. I'm going to figure out what works. And really what I'm looking for, to some degree, I'm listening to the words and the conversations. But in a lot of cases, I'm actually looking for the order and the framework, the process by which or when we introduce certain concepts, so that I'm always looking for an outline. In my mind, a script is an outline, and I know I have to accomplish a few different things. So I'm trying to figure out what is the right order in order to have that nice logical flow to emotion, right? Then I'm going to write out something very detailed like this. It's going to have every single a bit of everything I'm going to cover, and I'll probably write it out word for word. I'm going to sort of mentally talk through it, write it out like a formal script, like a dialogue, a transcript, if you will. I'm going to write and reduce, right? So what I'm doing is I'm actually taking that, then I'm doing it just like an actor would, right? I'm going to take the script, I'm going to read it. I'm going to do a read. There's going to be a whole bunch of things that read funny. Words don't go together right. If you've ever written an essay and then tried to read it out loud, you'll realize that your dialogue is very different from sort of just writing a high school paper. So that's kind of the way you're going to write it the first time. But when you read it aloud, you're going to go through and you're going to start to tweak that and make it more normal. So I'm going to actually talk through it, and then I'm going to start to do it from memory, do little pieces from memory. And again, that's going to reduce it again, because ultimately when I get down to the script, even the most formal scripts, I want that to be more or less a bulleted sort of flow of things that I need to accomplish and some hints to the person that's actually using the script. And then once I've got it to that, then all those little pieces, all those little structures in my script and outline, I had somebody once upon a time when I was trying to sort of improve my public speaking, and I have always been one that's when I do a talk, I do it without notes, and I do it completely from memory. And that can be difficult when you're giving 30, 45 minutes, even an hour-long presentation or talk at a conference. And so in order to do that, I use this same process, right? I write the whole thing out, exactly the ideal way I'd like to deliver it. Then I practice it a few times, I reduce it down, and then ultimately each time I reduce it down. And what I end up with is, if I'm going to give a 30-minute talk, I probably have a little intro chunk, and I have one point chunk, second point chunk, third point chunk, and then a final chunk that I want. And maybe inside of there, I'm opening with a story and then an example and then the point that I want to make. So I have sort of a little substructure in there. And all of that, this is the advice that I got, is to think of those as sort of lily pads on a pond. And what you're trying to do is you're trying to get across from where you stand in this little stream. You're trying to hop from lily pad to lily pad in order to get to the other side. And so in your mind, that's how you remember everything. What's my first lily pad? Well, I'm going to do this intro and I'm going to share this story. And so that's all that you're retaining in that memorization, is you're just how to, that little sort of memorization technique just gives you that thing. That's all you're focused on. I'm not focused on the next lily pad yet, right? So every one of these are self-contained. That way, we're going to talk about this in a second, that way if the customer takes you off, right, and for whatever reason, instead of hopping on this lily pad, they take you to this other lily pad that you didn't plan on getting to, you can look and you can say, okay, I've got 3 other sort of places that I can go here. So I may, for this customer, need to hop on a different one. Instead of my straight line flow, I may need to jump to lily pad number 2 and then come back to lily pad number 1, right? So when I'm doing this organization, I know generally I have to cover all of those, but I may be able to do them in different orders. And since I've memorized them or I've practiced them in little chunks, I can execute those chunks at different times, and it really gives a dynamic flow instead of feeling like a memorization. Or if you've ever listened to somebody that's always trying to force the customer back into their script, it can be really offsetting, right? Because they've got an agenda, you're like a robot, you're trying to get them across the stream, but you keep forcing them, and their mind is on something completely different. So this lily pad sort of analogy will allow you to move around with them, but still get across the stream by using that. And you're going to hand out, so then when we go to formal, you're actually going to hand out not the original script that you wrote word for word, but you're going to hand out that lily pad script. So you're going to say, hey, here's a couple ways to intro. Here's some objections that might take you off the path. Maybe some alternative lily pads that you've got to, chunks that you have to handle. But this is your straight through sort of set of chunks or lily pads that you need to accomplish. And then ultimately, we're going to role play this script with the team over and over and over again. We're going to practice it on our team meetings where we're sitting down with our one-on-ones. We're going to go through, hopefully you have some specific role-playing sessions. We're going to go through that script and we're going to continue to mark it up and revise it. And the salespeople themselves, when they're using that formal script, should be marking it up and revising it themselves. And then when they're going back to the sales director and they're talking about performance and scripts, they should be able to talk specifically to some notes that are on that script and continue to make it better for the whole team. And when you're in a sales meeting and you're sharing things that you figured out, it's like, hey, I did this chunk a little bit differently than the way the script does. You guys should try this because it was really effective, or I'm going to continue to use this. And that's how you kind of test and revise and optimize. Okay, so let's go now to the personal and on-the-fly script. So I'm doing the same thing. I've got, and you can see close, this is actually for a discovery call for Kaleido. And you can see what I do here is I've got sort of 3 different sections. I've got the series of opening questions, so I can open the dialogue, get the consumer talking. So I have some questions. Then I have my objectives. These are the 4 chunks that I need to accomplish. And you can see, if you can read closely, most of these statements start with believe, right? They need to believe this. They need to believe in this. They need to believe this. Because again, it goes back to I'm selling certainty. So my objective is to understand and make sure that they believe in what we're getting ready to deliver. I don't want to sell a product or service to someone unless they believe these things to be true in some cases, or that this particular approach will be effective in their situation, right? And then ultimately, I have my next steps. So once I get down to closing this, I want to, right off the top of my head, know exactly where I need to take this person on their next steps, right? So in order to build this, I do it a little bit differently, right? So I don't have a bunch of sales calls generally to reference. Sometimes I do have a formal script and I'm playing off of that. But when I'm building this kind of card, generally what I'm doing is I'm thinking of, hey, what are the objectives that I need to accomplish? What are a couple of or probable sort of objections that may come out of that? And then ultimately, what are the outcomes this particular lead is probably looking for? Then, just like I did here, I'm going to bullet point my straight line argument. So the things that I need to argue and the logic path that I need to go through and convince them of. And then again, within here, oftentimes I'll put down a few, because I have some experience probably around this. What do I think some exceptions or some objections might be? And I'm going to bullet point that logical argument as well. And then ultimately, even if I'm going to get on this call in an hour, I'm going to dry run this, right? So I'm going to talk out loud and I'm going to dry run this approach and the way that I think I'm going to approach this client using this card. Then I'm going to make some notes, make some revisions, and I'm going to go into the meeting. Then the things that's important to that, well, I'm going to save that for a second. So now we've got our scripts and we're talking about using them, right? So, and I've kind of demonstrated a couple different ways that I use these. These are sitting right in front of me, whichever one I've got, the formal one or this one, and I'm making sure that I'm moving through this and I'm accomplishing everything that's on this card. But there are a few things that I don't do that are common mistakes here. One, I simply don't sell without a script, right? And this is probably, it goes back to my military training. No matter how routine the mission is, no matter how routine the objective is, we're still going to do a dry run, right? And we're going to do it when we're doing that dry run, we're going to have a plan. Again, no matter how many times we've done something over and over again in the military, we're always going to have a defined plan. Whether when I was flying, we would go in, we would pre-brief exactly what we were going to do on that sortie, and then we would go up and we would do it, and then we would come down and we would post-brief it and talk about what we did and whether or not it aligned with what we planned, things we ran into, those sorts of things. Same thing when I was doing counterintelligence operations. We planned the operations. In fact, we had to get higher level approval of the operation. Then we had to execute the operation very consistently with the plan. And then we had to write up exactly the results and the outcomes of how that operation executed. And next steps. And so anyway, the point is, no matter how many times we did it, we still started with a plan. So no matter how commonplace this activity is, and again, one of the things is, so this is a call, but I do the same thing when I'm building out email, right? There's a plan, there's a script for my email or text message. Actually, this is email. This one was text message. Right? I'm still going to build a plan for those other channels because, again, I'm selling. So anytime I'm selling, I'm going to make sure that I have a script. Then I'm going to memorize those scripts through role playing, right? And again, it's not rote memorization. I'm going to memorize how I'm going to do those little chunks, and I'm going to practice those little chunks over and over again. Practice in my car, maybe I'm practicing in my cube. A lot of times I like to record it on my phone and then listen to it back. So just use your little voice recording in there, and you can just, as you're listening to and from work, just like a podcast, you can listen to your sales pitch, or you can listen to the little chunks of it over and over again, and that's going to help you to memorize it. And then, of course, I'm going to run through a couple times, and then I'm never going to set it and forget it, right? So this is really important. This goes into my last point of how to use my script. So even as formal as this, like I mentioned all along the way, is I'm taking notes and revising. And so the only way that you can do that is, one, you physically have the script in front of you and maybe you're marking that up. But the other thing, and you've heard me say this before, if you've been on any of my other sales videos, never sell without a pen and paper in front of you. You should be constantly writing notes, what's working, what they're saying, what's important, what's their priority. And sometimes you're just taking notes that you're not necessarily even going to use in the call. That's a way to keep you focused and engaged in the conversation by you taking notes. And it's not trying to do a transcript of everything that's said, but things that pop out to you, maybe language that they use, things that they mention, things that you want to refer back to. This is a technique I talk in some other videos. If you can write something down, you can let them talk for the next 2 or 3 minutes, and then you reference back something that they said a long time ago, their mind is going to click into a whole different sort of trusting mode, because they're like, oh, he was really listening to me. He noticed that I said that, or I mentioned that, or that was important. And so that's how I use the script. Most important, prepare the script, build the script, but then have it in front of you in whatever mechanisms or mean. It could be up on your screen. I'm a tactile person. I like to write it up, even if you're going to do it quick. And then, of course, never forget, sell with pen and paper in front of you. Hope that's been helpful on how to use sales scripts. Make sure you tune into the rest of these. If you want to get our sales scripts, there is an offer somewhere around this video that will allow you to request some of our sample scripts and templates. So I encourage you to get into the community, get engaged, subscribe and like wherever you see this video, and we'll see you on the next video.